about. I always say how, and if you like an old war horse like me, you've been doing this a long time, man. They didn't have this kind of stuff 20 years ago where you was doing entrepreneurship. So being able to connect with other people who are going in the same direction as you, who are trying to build something, who are in the middle of putting together cool solutions, like that just didn't exist 20 years ago. So this is something that I really want y'all to take advantage of. Every time you hop on Founder Fridays, try to connect with somebody. So I always like to start every Founder Friday right there. One more thing before we get started, we got Miss Dawn Myers here with us today. So Dawn is going to be co-hosting this Founders Fridays with us, me and Keontae, going forward. She is going to be jumping on Fridays to share this journey with us as we building businesses. Our tagline is that we want to create access to knowledge, network, and capital for founders. So that's what we're here to do. Dawn has her own journey that she's going on, which is amazing. Some really cool stuff that I know she can't quite share yet. But if she could just give us the 30-second, 2-minute introduction of what she's doing and all the cool stuff she's working on, and then we'll get started.
Yeah,
Miss
for
Dawn?
sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Dawn Myers, founder at Ritualist. You can find me at Dawn Does the Most on most socials. And basically, I'm a hardware founder. I create new technology in the textured hair space. We partner with big manufacturers to bring that technology to life. And then we build brands around them and scale them. It's really fun work. It's really hard work. We've done a lot of fundraising. There's a lot of learning. So I'm excited to share with you guys. And I'll pass the mic back.
Yep. All right. So as you can see, your hosts are going through this. I hate when you get to entrepreneurial stuff and the people that are talking to you haven't done it themselves. So Dawn is building something, has built something. As you all know, y'all know, most of y'all know my story. A lot of my students join Founder Fridays. I'm on my 4th startup now. So our EdTech firm, we just finished our Seed Plus round. We went through TechStars last year. So we just closed out our seed plus round. They call it the seed plus round. That's the terminology I learned in Techstars. So we just closed our seed plus round. We got about 30 employees in 7 states on our EdTech platform, serving about 25, 30,000 students now across the country. So we're growing like gangbusters, but built from the ground up. So love to share our journey as we support you all on your journey. All right. So now the man of the hour, Mr. Maurice Boissiere. I think I'm pronouncing it correct. I'll let him correct me in a second. But I want to make sure before I bring him on that we do the embarrassing thing and read his bio. we gotta make sure we bring him in correct, treat our guests correctly. All right, so I'm just going to read a quick little blurb on Maurice so you know who he is. And of course, he'll talk a little bit more about him and his experience. So with over 20 years of leadership experience at early stage venture-backed companies, Maurice has developed a unique set of skills that allows him to use them to help founders build their ventures faster. All right, now he's with Data Tribe, a cybersecurity startup studio that invests and co-builds startups, and he teaches entrepreneurship at the Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. He also serves on the advisory board of the Dingman Center for entrepreneurship at the Smith School, and also he's with U.M Ventures, which is a Maryland Momentum Fund. All right, so that is the bio, Mr. Maurice. Thank you for coming today. We are excited to hear Jules and hear you drop a lot of knowledge about this space. Please introduce yourself to the people.
Well, first and foremost, I'm excited to be here, humbled to be here. When you reached out about it, I was like, "Oh, me?" I was like, "Okay." You take it for what you paid for it in terms of the advice. But happy to be here. See some familiar faces, see some new faces. So it's all love. What can I say about myself? I'm just a serial entrepreneur. So prior to Data Tribe, I had participated in about 10 startups over the last 20-something years. 2 that were actually 3 that were kind of like garage level where, you were the first and only employee type thing. So I've done the journey several times. Of those journeys, 3 have turned out well, but most of them have like just gone kapunk. And that's where, I've learned my lessons. And I got into venture actually kind of the backwards way. I had been at my last startup. Some of you may know of a company called Territory Foods, is a DMV area kind of chef to home prepared meals, and got laid off because
Mm.
the Series A investor was like, y'all need to conserve burn. And me and my crew got let go. And so I was like, why do I keep doing this? And I kind of took inventory of like what I knew and didn't know. And I was like, I don't really know anything other than how to start a company. And there's some categories I don't know anything about, so I couldn't tell you how to do like a hardcore healthcare startup. Just because of all the FDA stuff that goes with it. But so I just started working with founders around. All right, let me help you like go from idea to some sort of tactile implementation of what you're doing. And then thought I was doing that at T.H.E.M. I thought I'd go find me a customer, and they're like, "Hey, how'd you like a job?" That's basically what we do. Although let me just straight like half the money for twice the money for half the work. You got me. I'm in. So I've been in T.H.E.M for 4.5 years, working with cybersecurity startups, which I fell in love with. Had no love for it beforehand, but I fell in love with it for two main reasons. One is that it ain't never going anywhere. So it's the golden goose. As long as the internet and digital expanding, protecting it is going to be there. So but really the second thing is the people who I find in cyber tend to be very mission oriented. I like sort of socially aligned causes. And while I might rationalize a little bit on how cyber is social, as a socially redeeming cause, actually you are like, none of this is possible if it's not protected. So that's me. And that's what I do. And I am a startup guy. They have all these different definitions now, but I'm a 0 to 20 employee type of person.
Nice, nice. Well, that's awesome because most of the businesses on here are 0 to 20
Exactly.
businesses. Actually, a good portion of them are probably 0 to 1 or 2 at this stage. So just love to hear that's where your expertise sort of lies because I just think in the journey a lot of times you learn a lot. And even you're learning from going to work a job and then say I'm better at starting companies. Even that in and of itself is something that as an entrepreneur you have to learn over time because I think every entrepreneur has been faced with, should I work a job? Should I go after this 9 to 5? Should I go after this 401k, or should I chase my idea? I mean, I just feel like that's something that every entrepreneur has to go through.
Yeah, but look, you got to balance the reality of paying your bills, taking care of you and your family kind of thing with sticking with your authentic self, right? And figuring out how you navigate that path. Like, but for me, it didn't all start coming into kind of flow state until I started like leaning into what my strengths were and frankly really stopped caring about what people thought about my weaknesses. Like, yeah, you're right, I'm dyslexic, and your point is like, or
Yeah.
oh yeah, no, I didn't read that, but give me the name, I'll audiobook it. Like
Yeah.
that stuff. Once I stopped caring, I just, things started just clicking for me.
Gotcha. I love that, and I mean, I love that story, and most people on this line are in that journey somewhere, whether it's towards the end or towards the beginning. So I want to start it out, and like I was just messaging Don, like, please jump in, because I know Don probably got a million questions. And y'all, as we get going with this conversation, please throw some questions in the chat. We'll make sure we field them so we can get them up. Or we'll just, once we recognize who you are, you can just take yourself off mute to ask your question. But in the beginning, so we got people might be thinking about venture, might be thinking about even raising money. You're talking about that friends and family round when you're really getting started, like you said, going from zero. What should people be thinking about when they're first thinking about the idea of maybe I need to raise some money, maybe I need to start building a team? What should founders be thinking about at that stage?
Well, well, you're thinking about a lot of stuff, but first of all, like, are you ready? If you're at that stage of like, yeah, I want to do this, are you ready? Because starting a company is not it's not easy in any way, shape, or form. Mainly because whatever you think you're doing, you're not doing it. Like whatever you think you don't know. And maybe once you've done it 5 times, sure. But first time founder specifically, It's just a very unclear, uncertain journey. And you have to be very comfortable with the fact that you're probably going to be wrong most of the time. And your experiments aren't going to work most of the time. And so you kind of have to start off with this like very deep set mission, like I want to do this. But here's the difference. I want to, if it's I want to build a blah, 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 it's really hard to stick with that, right? If you want to solve a certain problem, like I want to solve how hard it is to maintain hair care for women with textured hair, right? I don't know what the solution is. I just know that's the problem. The problem that as long as you identify the problem, you will find the solution. But the problem doesn't change. Solutions change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So get oriented around the problem and start with why.
I want to
I
jump
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Don,
It's
jump
really
in.
beautiful. I want to jump in with a little bit of a hard-hitting question. Now, Tremaine's question started at the beginning, right? I want to jump all the way to the end.
Uh-huh.
One of the big issues in the space with underrepresented people generally, but with women and Black women in particular, is that they're not having conversations around the money. And they're not having conversations around what this really could look like. To the extent that you feel comfortable, Mo, can you tell us about those exits? What did a good exit look like? What did a bad exit look like? What can we aspire to as we, take these risks and we're doing all the work? What's at the end of the road?
Ooh, well, I mean, exits are exits. Like you want an exit if possible, like good or bad, right? You just want a happy ending to your story. I would almost say like, but focusing on the exit in and of itself is almost is a little perversive in that like you don't know. Like like just think about now, like what Instacart went public this week at a 10 or 11 billion valuation. And a year ago there were 39 billion. Dog, like the weather changes fast, right? Like you don't know whether or not you're going to start something that's super hot, something that's super boring. You just can't predict the macro trends, which is why it comes down to like what's the dog in the fight, right? Like, or the fight in the dog, another way to put it. Like it comes down to like what's inside of you, what are you building, what problem are you solving, and how passionate are you about it. Right. Now, to your point about the money conversation, is a tough. Some people are just culturally grow up around the money conversation, right? And it's code, right? There's plenty of code words that people do. And I'm learning this now as I kind of go through it. There are code words at each stage of the conversation as how
Tell us about those code words. Yes.
The company's metrics, other kind of stuff. But the code words like, so, so when you're starting a company, how do you define the market? Like, and so that comes down to problem. The market is defined by what problem are you solving? Can you articulate a big enough problem that's yet small enough for you to focus on it as a one-man show, if you think about it. Like you can go solve, like if you're gonna go solve some problem that every big tech company is already working on, it's like, come on, like really? Like you got to go solve a problem that people can be like, hey, 5 years from now, I can see this being a big deal. Like nobody really cares about it now, but in 5 years, I can see this being a really big market. It's growing. It's, it's something that not enough people are paying attention to today, but it's going to be a big deal. So that's where you are when you're like seed stage. Seed stage is simply market and founder market fit. Like why this market, why this founder? And then as you grow, you get some traction, you get some customers. It actually becomes harder because it's like, then everybody wants to know, well, that's great. You got 10 customers. How much did they pay? How long did you take it to get them? How long before they churn? Like what's their lifetime value? So you get into all the metrics of, LTV, which is lifetime value to customer acquisition cost to, which is a common metric people are looking for. It varies by industry. Does it take 3 months? Does it take 6 months to acquire them? How much do you spend on that? Those become key metrics. Then when you get next stage, it becomes all about your churn. Like, hey, how long do you keep your customers before they churn? They not only look at sort of net retention, but net dollar retention. So, okay, that's great. you keep 95% of your customers, but of the customers you keep, the best customers. You should have 110% net dollar retention thing. So yeah, you learn how to talk about these different metrics in a very comfortable flow state. But yeah, and then as you get later and later, the bankers have their terminology. There's bankers for, to get acquired. There's bankers to go public. But it all comes down to telling your story and understanding that language of the money, basically.
That's right.
That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. I'm gonna jump into the other side of it because you talked about, the problem. Is this a good enough problem? And is this a good enough founder? Don brought in the money piece of it. Let's go to the founder piece of it. We got 25 founders on the line here today. What kind of founder are you looking for when it comes to investing or VCs or investors, looking for? Because I think that's a heavy piece of it. I say all the time that whatever the idea is on day one, it's going to change 1,000 times before it actually gets to market.
Exactly.
And what I would say an investor is looking for is the person that can stay with all of those iterations. So what are you looking for when it comes to the founder side of it?
Man, what you just said. So well, first of all, what makes me think that this person's learning curve is not it's going to be shallower than anybody else? Like, what makes me think that? So founders who are doing something in their space have an advantage because we know you're coming with if you're coming with your own Rolodex of people, if you're coming with what we'll call trust, people trust your opinion in this sector, that's very helpful because then we know that the time to market is not going to be as long as if somebody was like, yeah, I got this great idea. I noticed something from far away and, I'm going to do a complete pivot. I know nothing about this space, but I can do it. Right. And so then what you're going to go and look at in both those cases is like, well, what have they done? Right.
Yeah.
Have they stuck with anything in their life? What are the indicators of success? And I don't mean like, they got money. I mean, what are the indicators that they can persevere through adversity? That's why a lot of military people get funded. It's sort of like, you persevered through through that, you persevered through the war. Like there's things that you're just looking for that make you say, when the fight gets tough, is this person gonna pack it up and then and my money goes kapoof?
Yeah. What would you say is the percentage of idea, problem that they're looking to solve versus the founder themselves? Like, is it more important to have what you just described in a founder or an idea and a viable idea and a big enough market, that piece of it?
Well, I'll tell you the general kind of theme around that is you're better off with a founder and a B idea. Sorry. A founder and a B idea, because the idea is going to change. Remember, the problem is going to stay there, but the idea is going to change. Mm-hmm. So you're better off having a better founder, but it's a combination thereof, right? Like, so it's not just like, oh, do I have like this Rhodes Scholar trying to solve a problem? Like, it's got to be a problem that you believe is monetizable and will create some economic value. And then the question is, it's always got to be a person who I think can get the shit there. And guess what? We also don't have to, do we think this is the person to take it public? Like, we know that an early stage founder is very different than a professional manager. It's become more common, but if you look at the history of startups, the number of founders who are actually public CEOs or takes a company public is very rare. You hear about it because they tend to be very public figures, but it's really rare. So we're really just saying, hey, I mean, literally, we look out like, can this person get us to B round? That's literally the only question. If we can get to B round and it doesn't work, we know we can go hire someone if needed. But can this person at least create economic value over the next 5 years?
I love it. I love that. So maybe a real world example, and the only reason I'm thinking about it because Zara, she was one of my students. She's on my stage. She's on my screen right now. So I'm gonna talk about her. She won't be mad, but she's a dancer, and in the dance space, she does ballet, all of the stuff. In the dance space, she noticed that to get dance tights and things like that in her skin tone, That was a problem. And so her business is that she's building an app, with, some AI, some different stuff that can do skin matching so that dancers can get tights, professional dancers can get tights in there. So I think, and I just using her example, she was right on the screen, something like that kind of aligns with what you're talking about. We have somebody who's got industry expertise. They see a problem in a space that they've spent years curating themselves in, and then they look to try to solve a problem in that space. Would that kind of be kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. So she sees the problem. She's coming at it from like an application standpoint. She's not in the textile industry. She doesn't know distribution in the textile industry,
right?
But she's coming at it. You can fill all that stuff in. I mean, this is some women at the University of Maryland started something called Aurora Tights. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. But same kind of concept. Jasmine was a ice skater, could never find tights in her skin tone, and three sisters got together and started a company. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
So and their journey was interesting because I remember they did Dingman Summer Accelerator. And and that's when they got hooked up. They met a manufacturer. They got into the intricacies of like, well, how does this stuff actually get made? What do you sell? How would you sell it? That kind of stuff.
Nice. All right, Don, you got something?
I really like to talk about that dynamic, right? Having competition isn't the worst thing. We want to have competition. That suggests that there's a there.
There's a market.
Right. And also, we have to understand when it's worth it to kind of enter a space with a certain amount of competition, right? So can you talk to us about how you weigh those variables, right? Like, as you mentioned before, if you're a one-person team and you're competing with Google to release a new technology, probably not a great bet, right? But if you're, doing something with a smaller barrier to entry, how do you think about distinguishing yourself in a space? How do you think about when and to the extent it's appropriate to enter into a growing or hyper competitive market?
Well, what I see, it comes down to differentiation. So how do you boil the problem down to be specific enough that you're solving a problem, but you're not, taking on Goliath? Here's the thing. So there's certain category, well, certain just thoughts, right? So one is a big company like a Google, whatever, like unless they're pointing their cannon at it, like they see it as a really big problem, they're not going to pay attention to it. That's one. And the second part of it is most big companies, if they're trying to solve it, usually they're going to screw this up over the next 5 years through committees. Like smaller teams are always going to outperform these multifunctional, multi-geographic, over-resourced teams. Let me tell you, related but not related is one of the things I cringe at the most is an overfunded startup. Because overfunded startups don't have to build the fight muscle.
Yes.
They don't have to. They're like, oh, you know what? That didn't work. Like, yeah, let's just go take another $10 million and go after it. Like, no, man. Like, there's no like resource kind of thing. Half the Fortune 100 companies were started during a downturn because you really have to prove something. So like we just did an investment at Data Tribe in a category that's like big boy category. We're like, everybody's doing DIY. Like it's a big problem. Most companies are doing it internally. We're like, they're all going to screw it up over time. No offense to any Deloitte, Accenture, whatever, but the minute a company is like hired a big integrator to come solve a problem, like no, a 5-person startup team will always run circles around them if they stay hyper focused and vigilantly focused on the problem.
That's right.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. I think that scrappy component, that scrappy, resilient, that is something that you cannot manufacture. Like, I think that's got to be inside of the founder. I don't think that's something you can't buy that, you can't purchase it. That can't come from outside. The founder almost has to come to the table with that.
Oh yeah. But I think most founders, if you're crazy enough to start a company, I think you bring that with you a little bit. Yeah. All
right, couple questions in the chat. Maurice, how do I know if my company is venture backable? That's a good one. And if not, what are some other resources that I can leverage for funding?
All right. So first one, how do you know if it, well, so I'd start with, uh, it, Crunchbase, PitchBook is probably too expensive for anybody. But if you go to Crunchbase, like, yeah, are there people funding this category, right? There are a bunch of stuff that, like I'll just take, we do cybersecurity, right? Within cybersecurity, you can be government focused or commercially focused, right? We don't touch government stuff because that's just not our charter. That's not what we do. But there's a whole like universe of people who fund government contractor type companies. So one, I just thought of like, is there money out there in the category that I'm going after? Then the second thing within your category is like, what's my business model? Like, look, if it's a slow growth company at 30% margins, gross margins, probably not. Like most of these, you can go and look up, you guys can go Google. There are some norms around how fast you're growing and what's your profitability. So I think there's a rule of thumb right now that I'm hearing, like the market is basically like, if you're not profitable and growing like 50-60% a year, you need to be doubling in size every year.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not venture backable. That's like the kind of the rule these days.
So what are the stages, just for everybody here? Because when you say venture, it sounds good. It's a term that you hear on TV, social media, but what are really kind of the levels of funding? So, you got like friends and family, then you move into, so explain that for everybody just so they can understand like what even venture backable even really means. There's
Right.
levels you got to go through to even get to that spot.
But before I do that, I do want to pause and say, look, how do I put this? Every business doesn't need venture capital, and venture
Yes,
capital is not
yes.
for every business. And venture capital is not the only type of capital. It's just a term that got applied to people who are betting on companies that literally had no business model back when people only underwrote companies that had a business model, meaning customers. So to the person's other question, your other sources besides venture capital are government grants, which is one of the best. But I will tell everybody the best source of capital is called customer revenue.
Right.
The best source of capital is somebody taking their hard-earned
Right.
money out of their pocket and handing it to you for
Okay.
your products and services.
And we have an expression: revenue cures all ills.
It
So
does.
you get revenue. So first and foremost, start off with like, before you go, I need capital to make it out. Can you find customers? Will somebody write you a check to solve this problem? That's first and foremost. And then you have venture capital. You also have debt. Like, is another way to do it. Like, do I go and put my house on the market or whatever? Get a mortgage, get some debt
Get a
from
loan.
whatever.
Yeah.
You have debt. I wouldn't recommend that, but and then also depending on how high tech it is, there's all these government sources of funding from the government. So there's a lot of different sources of capital. Venture capital itself has all these crazy, stupid names. But basically, you start off. This is where the term economic advantage comes from, because we don't have family that can write you a $20,000, $50,000 check. I know, I still don't. So, you don't have that where you can just say, hey, Uncle Johnny, I am thinking about doing this idea. My friends and I are doing blah, blah. Oh, here you go. Go get some computers, right? So that's the first stage of it. We call it friends and family and fools, because they're betting on you. It's a bet in the person. It's a bet on hope. Almost all of that stuff is not going to work out, but the ones that do, do. And then after you have that, you get into what we call institutional funding. So venture capital really comes from the term of you go and raise money from pension funds and endowments. So they go raise money, and then they take that money and invest it in companies. So that's the institutional capital, right? Which is very different than, you could have an angel write you $100 million check. It's still not institutional capital. Or strategic. That's not institutional capital. So the reason why that's considered good is the due diligence, or kind of the regulatory requirements for those investors. So there's a certain amount of like rigor that goes into how they think about their investments, how they diligence their investments, how they manage their investments for their investors. So it's considered to be like just a higher bar because they're not just they can't just write checks because they feel like it, right?
Yeah.
So that starts at what they call seed or pre-seed. And the only difference in the definition there is it used to be seed was I ain't got no customers yet. But it's a great idea and a great founder. But then some of those people started having customers, so then they created a new category called pre-seed, which is basically I ain't got no customers yet. So you have this super early stage of a venture. It's, for all intensive purposes, when you get to that stage, you've got an understanding of who you're selling to some degree, an understanding, but it's not defined. It's not permanent. It's not really like validated yet. You have a sense of what you're building. Either you've built it, you've done your MVP or your first version of it, but you've got a sense of what you're building. Sometimes it's just a PowerPoint, but most of the time you've done something, right? That's the seed stage. Now, seed to A is actually the hardest part of the journey. You have far less people get funded at A than number of people who go from A to B, right? So seed to A is kind of like the vulnerable years. And that's where what we call product market fit. Are there people willing to write a check for what you're selling? And that's the basics of it. And so the ranges are always varying, but a pre-seed, best way to think about it, a pre-seed round is going to be $1 million or less. A seed round is going to be 3 to 5 these days, which is insane. It used to, like 4 years ago, it was 2 million. An A round is going to be a $10 million round. So an A round, when you go to an A round, you should have depends on your industry, but if you're doing enterprise software, $1 million to $2 million in revenue, however that breaks out in terms of customers, but ideally, if it's enterprise, you're selling at least $50,000 to $100,000 average selling price for each customer. Could be more, could be less, but we'd rather see five 200,000 a year customers versus $1 million a year customer, because it's not a trend. It doesn't prove anything. So that's when you get to A. So A is like, okay, do you have some revenue? And then I'm going to give you 10 million because now I think you've got the right messaging and the product fit. Now I want to see you scale it. I want to see you go from 2 million to from 2 million in revenue to about 10 million in revenue, ideally. And when you get 10 million in revenue, then now you can go raise a 35 to 65 million dollar round, where you get judged purely on like sales metrics, like how fast you sell, how much you sell, what are the economics of each of those sales, like how much profit is in there, kind of thing. Those are the stages. Then after that, it's just you're off to the races. The letters just represent the next round that you got.
Nice.
Yeah, but the key thing here, and this is like one of the big things that entrepreneurs miss. So one thing I would say is focus on the problem. And the second thing is never, ever, ever, ever underprice. Right? Like what you price and what you sell are two totally different things. But you want to price to make money, because guess what? The money isn't the revenue. You pay yourself with the profit. So if you underprice yourself, you cut down your profit. And if you cut down your profit, you cut down your runway.
Yeah.
Nice.
Pricing,
nice. I think that's a common mistake, Maurice.
Oh, huge. Because because everybody's got imposter syndrome. So we're all like scared that what if they say no, right?
What if they say no?
Right? But guess what? If you look at psychology, of course, if they're in their right mind, they're going to say no, right? Sometimes pricing to connote value is what you have to do. Pricing to say like, no, it's expensive and it's worth it.
That's right.
Yeah. I love that. I love that.
Answer that really quickly, Mo. I think another mistake that a lot of founders make is we think about a lot of soft variables, and all those soft variables are really important to determine whether or not their company is venture backable. But at the end of the day, you're going to be making an argument to a VC, and you've got to make a persuasive argument, and you've got to make a numbers-based argument to that VC. And it's really important, guys, to think about that roadmap. If we think about where the VC sits and how they're incentivized, if you say, look, I'm a pre-seed founder, in order to get from stage A to stage B, from step 1 to step 2, I need $1 million. Now, not everybody needs $1 million in funding to get to step 1 to step 2, but let's use a round number. You got to take into consideration the fact that your investors are looking for at least 100x return. Venture capital, angels are a little bit different, but venture capital is not an asset class where we're looking for 20% returns. We're looking for major returns, right? So the big question, ask yourself all of the soft questions. Also, make sure that you can put together projections that get you. If you're asking for $1 million, you're going to have to return them $100 million? You're going to have a valuation. You're going to have an exit at $100 million to even be minimally viable in this space. Can you draw up projections with your business model, with your revenue streams that are going to get you there? If the answer is no, you still could be venture backable. Maybe you're not thinking as robustly about your model as you could be, but you got to be able to back it up with numbers first. You got to get there first.
I love that. I love that. All right, we got one more question in the chat. Miss Rochelle. All right, so her question is that she has an educational startup, which is dope, by the way. Rochelle, you want to take yourself off mute and just ask your question? I'm not even going to read it. I'm going to let you do it.
Yeah, I'll ask my question. So my question is, so with my startup, I've been in business for almost a year now. November 1st will make it a year. And my question is, how can I go about scaling my company where I can acquire new customers and increase that engagement rate? Because it's been kind of really slow as far as customers and just reaching to my specific target audience. I've tried a lot of things from marketing and doing pop-up shops, but it just seems like getting that customer base has been a challenge for me.
Yeah, I think that's why you're a startup. It's part of the journey. But who's your ideal customer? Like, who's your customer?
So I have 2 ideal customers. One specifically are Gen Zers, so ages 18 to 25, around that age. Someone focused on either getting scholarships, so a high school student or a college student wanting to understand scholarships, as well as wanting to grow professional. So I guess you could say the typical college student going to school, wanting to figure out how to pay for school and wanting to have a career after that.
Oh, look, 2 different markets. Like getting money for school is very different from paying for life after school. So of those 2, who are you really serving?
It's kind of hard to say because I like to think of my company as a one-stop shop. So I speak about education, but I speak about education from scholarships to professional development. Is no specific niche within education. It's just the broad topic of anything I feel will add value to my end user.
Yeah, so okay, so that becomes a challenge, right? So the more things you do, the less you are.
Okay.
The more categories you cover, the less value you offer. And so it's kind of counterintuitive, but did you know that you can cut steel with water? Huh?
No.
If you apply enough pressure, water will cut through steel. And so the whole idea of focusing on a particular problem or person is that you apply enough pressure to that problem to break through. If you distribute that water across the surface, it just bounces off. So what's happening is you're trying to solve multiple problems at the same time. Rather than trying to solve them all at the same time, pick one. I'm not saying you have to give up the other ones. I'm just saying pick one and be like, okay, I want to focus on scholarships. Boom. Who are the people who are going to like really bite on scholarships? Who are solution seeking customers around that? And that means that you're also going to end up talking to parents, because parents are probably more into the scholarships than the kids. And if the kid knows he has to pay for school, then you're talking about a certain economic group. And so then it becomes like your end user is a kid, but are there agencies or non-governmental agencies that are willing to pay for me to go and offer this to them? Right. See how that like just that one shift in thinking about that market versus somebody coming out of college, becoming a young professional. How do we teach these young professionals life skills as an example? It's a very different market. You're going to go to them very differently in terms of like where you reach them, how you talk about the pain, than if you're trying to talk and if you're trying to talk about to both of them with the same messaging, then none of them are going to get it.
Okay.
Right. So it's all about focus, focus, focus.
Okay. Thank you for that.
One thing I say all of the time to students I talk to, Maurice, is that some of the best startups, not even some of the best startups, solve a specific problem for a specific group of people. Like you got to get hyper focused, especially at this stage of the game.
I'd say occasionally, every now and then, somebody gets lucky and is like a generalist and has luck with it being a generalist. But
right.
I tell you, every big startup has an origin story focused around a very, very small market.
That's right.
Yeah, very small.
Yeah.
The best story, I mean, it's like, I guess the best story that everybody knows, it has to be like Amazon, starting with just out of rotation books, like hard to find books. Now you can literally buy anything on Amazon, like
Right.
25 years later, but the starting was like, just this one little box of, hey, books that's hard to find. That's why they used to do textbooks. I don't know if you got books from textbooks back in college from Amazon.
I was pre-Amazon.
Yeah, free Amazon.
But if you ever, they have a great, I mean, it's a great example. So what I did not know about Amazon that I learned on some podcast was he actually had the vision for the everything store before he started Amazon.
Yeah.
So it wasn't happenstance. He had a vision, but he said, I know I can't sell everything, like this internet thing, like, it's dial-up modems and stuff like that. So he started with books for some very good reasons. One was like nobody really owned the category. There's some big sellers, but the other one was, like he said, it wasn't a perishable good, but literally there was a report, like something published, like all the books out there. And he was like, we can get any book. And people would call and order the book. And then Amazon would order the book once somebody had placed the order. And like, yeah, we got it.
Yeah. That's awesome. That is an awesome story. All right, one more. We coming up on time. So if you got any questions, throw them in the chat. I think Sheila has a really good question. Are there any books or resources that you can recommend that has, just talking about the terminology that you used around venture capital and just, how to map out, the journey and the story around venture capital, raising money, any books or resources you would recommend?
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite blogs is, I'm going to look it up, NFX. It stands for Network Effect. NFX. Let me look at what the URL is. They are a West Coast firm, but they have a great content on their website. Oh, and they also have like this thing called signal.nfx.com, which is like a plugin, but anytime you connect with an investor, it like matches you up, or if you know of an investor. But they've got just some great content on how do you think about starting a company? How do you think about growing a company? I would highly recommend that. There are great podcasts out there. I mean, myself, I'm just addicted to Tech Me Ride Home because it keeps me up to date. But I'd highly recommend find some podcasts that just kind of talk about the industry. There's Seek to Scale, there's Adventure One. Listen to your favorite venture capitalists if they have a podcast, because the language, like you're picking up on the language and how do they talk about this stuff. Like I think about it like, how do I accelerate my cultural understanding around this? How do certain cultures talk about money? How do I accelerate I didn't work on Wall Street. Like, so I'm jealous of my friends who took that route and went and worked on Wall Street. Like they got that DNA now. They have that, like,
Yeah.
But just, learn that stuff. You don't have to become a banker, but you do want to maybe, I speak banker, kind of thing. But I'd highly recommend that. And then books. Are there any? Well, I just have to admit, I'm not a reader. I discovered I was dyslexic about 10 years ago, and literally like I'm an extreme personality. I'm told. So this is an example of my extreme personality. I realized that that's why basically when my son was really young, he read like Harry Potter in like a weekend, right? Like, no way you read that book in a weekend. I was like, I did that. He was like 8 or 9, right? So I quizzed him on the book. I'm like, this dude read the book and he like understands it. Like, it would take me 3 months to read that book. Am I really that slow of a reader? So I discovered I was dyslexic. I'm like, why am I wasting my time reading? Like I can read for pleasure, but why am I wasting my time reading? Like, I learned totally different. I discovered I was an auditory learner. So I just started doing books on tape. When somebody gives me a book recommendation, I go to YouTube, I put it in there. It's almost guaranteed to have like a nice little summary for me or to listen to the author. And I just listen to them. And I learned. So figuring out that kind of, so I don't really have any great books I would quote unquote recommend. But there's some one I would recommend for founders especially. It's a book called Pitch Anything by Oren something or another. But the book is about the power dynamics of communicating, and not just verbal, but like your nonverbal communication as well. But it's really important to understand, basically like the art of persuasion. The art of persuasion is not a logical argument in which you persuade people.
Nice.
People come to the table with layers and layers and layers and layers of biases, and your job is to get through the biases.
Yeah. Listen, this has been amazing, Maurice, man. We appreciate your time today. Zara, I know you got a question. I'll make sure I get it over to him. We get your answer. So I know I can text Zara, so I'll make sure I get her the answer to her question. But we coming up on time. That man, we really appreciate your time today. Really appreciate your time today. Let's give some love in the chat for Maurice. Is there any way they can follow you? Any way they can connect with you?
Again, I don't read, so therefore I'm only on LinkedIn. So they're more than welcome. I mean, I have an Instagram account, but whatever. Like,
yeah.
But I am on LinkedIn, Maurice Boissiere, and I will connect with you, and I will respond to your. It's not a DM, whatever it is, a LinkedIn mail.
Make sure y'all connect with Maurice on LinkedIn. We definitely are connected on LinkedIn. So if you connect with him on LinkedIn, and most of you guys know me, you'll see a mutual connection there. So there's that. All right, you want to leave the people with anything? Final words, Maurice?
Final words are
you guys, a lot of startups, a lot of founders on here. Leave them with something.
Be authentic. Be you. Let me tell you something.
Oh, I love that.
It's all about connection, and connection comes from being authentic. If you're somebody else, it's all about connection. It's all about building trust and connection. So be you, boo.
Love it. All right, this is Founders Fridays. As y'all can see, we dropping bars, we bringing heat. We got a lot more in store for you guys. Next week, we're doing our first rocket pitch of the season. So next Friday, you'll be able to pitch your businesses. We're giving away $1,000 next week. So make sure you show up. Make sure you tell a friend. We'll see if we can entice Maurice to come back, maybe be a judge or something. But next week, we're giving away $1,000 and tickets to DC Startup Week, which is the largest, biggest, best entrepreneurship conference in this region. So that's coming up next week. We got some great sponsors. Founding Farmers Restaurant Group is a sponsor. Mr. Dan Simons, he's going to be joining us. A lot of people who are in the BGV, they know Dan. He's awesome. So next week is going to be incredible. Founder Fridays, listen, I appreciate everybody showing up today. Let's keep this train going. Let's continue to connect with each other and encourage one another as we build the future. All right, Fridays.
Lean into your community, people.
Yes, indeed. All right. Thanks, Maurice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maurice.
Thank you.